Politics of the Medical Profession in Pearl and the Forgotten Village. So to give you guys a little bit of context for what I'm doing with Steinbeck, I first need to sort of go over the larger project that I've been working on for the past several years. And that is this dissertation that I defended a couple of years ago. I'm currently working on revising it. But my work is grounded in the new historicism. But as you guys probably know, the original new criticism focused only on form, and the new historicism has been accused of focusing only on history. And so literary criticism has kind of moved past the new historicism. But I'm trying to do more of a historical project with a greater emphasis on literary form. And the debate that I'm looking at is the long-standing debate about the professionalization of medicine starting in the Andrew Jackson years in the 1830s. In the 1830s, Andrew Jackson, during the age of Jacksonian democracy, distrusted medical practitioners. He saw them as being elitist and as being philosophers, and they're too worried about their science instead of the patients that they are supposed to help. So during that time, you saw a widespread deregulation of medicine. Across the whole country, states started to repeal medical licensing laws. And over the course of the next century, literature handled this debate in various ways. And I look at, in my project, I look at several writers and forms. The Gothic, I mostly looked at Poe, Hawthorne, and Lovecraft. Realism, Howells, Jewett, and Phelps. Naturalism, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Frank Norris, and Steinbeck. And satire, Sinclair Lewis. So I looked, the main purpose is to show the political inclinations of each form. So to kind of ground us, we first have to, and what I'm trying to do, we first have to start with maybe some naturalist genre scholarship. And what is naturalism is a question that's been sort of percolating for a long time. And genre studies have long tried to define what naturalism is. Unlike the realism of writers like Howells or James, naturalism is said to be inherently political and melodramatic. The critic Eric Carl Link argues that it is theme rather than genre, methodology, convention, tone, or philosophy that qualifies a text for inclusion in the school of American literary naturalism. Likewise, Keith Newland mentions that naturalism employs the narrative device of melodrama as an efficacious means to convince readers of the truth of their theses and to elicit sympathy for their protagonists, or prompt readers to take action to redress social imbalance. Likewise, elements of what we often associate with the naturalist novel include sensational storylines, the over-reliance upon narrative coincidence, the authorial intrusions, and the emotional overload. And with some of these definitions, I say it's very easy to see how some of Steinbeck's work fits here in this classification. And just some more scholarship. We all know that naturalism has often been called pessimistic determinism. And Malcolm Crowley, one of the famous critics from the 1960s, 1970s, argued that naturalists have no faith in reform, whether it be the reform of an individual by his own decision or the reform of society by reasoned courses of action. Walter Michaels' study, The Gold Standard and the Logic of Naturalism, also ties in homologies between political events and form. But my work is kind of grounded in a pretty recent study from a scholar named Ira Wells called Fighting Words, Polemics, and Social Change in Literary Naturalism. Wells's work contends that naturalism is inherently polemical, that it is less a coherent philosophy than it is an attitude, posture of aggressive controversy, which happens to cluster loosely around philosophical themes. So Wells's work mostly focused on Dreiser, London, and Richard Wright, and he focused on those because of their muckraking yellow journalism. And as we know, Steinbeck also did his fair share of journalism. So at the same time as that naturalism was emerging as a form, lots of things were going on with the medical profession in America. The medical profession after the Civil War had again started to solidify and re-legitimize itself. During the Civil War, the Union Army forbid any medical practitioners that were not from the mainline establishment. The Union Army forbid them from working on soldiers, despite the extreme shortage of medical doctors. And across the century, you started to see these accrediting agencies emerging. The American Medical Association developed in the late 19th century. The Association of American Medical Colleges formed, setting at the time a minimum 3-year curriculum. So sounds pretty light by today's standards. And we also saw the Flexner Report, which reformed medical schools across the country. The Flexner Report sort of set a standard curriculum. And despite all these reforms, there was still resistance to the mainline establishment. If you think about it, like today, even when you go to the doctor, especially if you go to a specialist, how often do you actually see the main doctor and talk to the main doctor? You usually talk to an intern, and you might talk to the doctor for 30 seconds. And the people in the late 19th century saw this as a problem, and they wanted their doctors to give a more personalized form of care. And many doctors who had long practiced medicine suddenly found themselves losing their ability to practice. This especially harmed rural areas without access to a certified doctor. As a result, outrage grew over many doctors who seemed competent, losing their ability to practice. If you guys are familiar with the naturalist novel McTeague by Frank Norris, that's all about that. McTeague loses his license, and everything goes deeply downhill from there. So, with regards to Steinbeck, my thesis here, with regards to a lot of these naturalist works, most seem to take a polemical stand against professionalization, showing how this larger social force, the profession, crushes individuals, whether it be a competent doctor losing a license or a doctor whose authority is so great due to having licensure that no one will challenge their professional authority. I see Steinbeck as such a voice, especially in his fiction following The Grapes of Wrath. I posit that Steinbeck uses philosophy to showcase what he perceived to be the narrow-minded thinking of medical professionalization, particularly with his definition of teleological and non-teleological thinking, to make a polemical argument showing how many people were disenfranchised by the professionalization of medicine. So, to ground us, I want to first talk about Steinbeck's own observations about medicine. Much has been said about Steinbeck's work growing more political, between the more politically neutral and dubious battle to the very political Grapes of Wrath. Tom Collins has long been noted as an influence on this development. While working in the migrant camps during this period, Steinbeck witnessed injustices committed against migrant workers by medical professionals, particularly public health workers and nurses. Bob Lamott has also noted in Steinbeck's reading the effect Dr. Gunn's Family Medicine, 19th century homeopathic tract, had on Steinbeck as it is cited in East of Eden. Steinbeck likely appreciated the book's similarities to his own worldview. with regards to Collins, the Grapes of Wrath was sort of attributed to Tom Collins at the beginning, and but with regards to medicine and how Tom Collins ran the migrant camps, Jack Benson notes in his biography that Collins was fairly similar to the 19th century alternative medical practitioners. He collected numerous data in his reports, from the occupiers of campers to the cars they drove, to visitors, work opportunities, attitudes of nearby farmers, the conditions in local squatters' camps, and even the diets of the farmers from personal observation. Collins also had a faith in basic Jacksonian democracy, which historically was resistant to professionalization, as I mentioned before. And Collins managing the medical conditions of the white migrants thus had a monumental impact on Steinbeck. The effect would not be felt, I argue, until after the Grapes of Wrath. So, in the Sea of Cortez, Steinbeck differentiated between teleological and non-teleological thinking, and it's significant that he used medicine to prove his point. To quote the log, teleological thinking considers changes and cures what should be in the terms of an end pattern. It presumes the bettering of conditions, often unfortunately, without achieving more than at most a superficial understanding of those conditions. Their sometimes intolerant refusal to face facts as they are, teleological notions may substitute a fierce but ineffectual attempt to change conditions which are assumed to be undesirable. And in contrast, non-teleological thinking is defined as the better alternative. It concerns itself primarily not with what should be, or could be, or might be, but rather with what actually is, attempting at most to answer the already sufficiently difficult questions what or how instead of why. And to show the limitations of teleological thinking, Steinbeck uses a medical example. He says, grant for a moment that among students of endocrinology, a school of thought might arise centering upon some belief as to etiology, upon the belief, for instance, that all abnormal growth is caused by glandular imbalance. Such a clique, becoming formalized and powerful, would tend by scorn and opposition to wither any contrary view which, if untrammeled, might discover a clue to some opposing causative factor of equal medical importance. Steinbeck later builds in the Sea of Cortez his example and extends it to the problem of religious fundamentalism, but it's significant that he uses a medical example here to define his thinking. So getting to the text, the pearl, the doctor in the pearl has no regard for his patient, young infant Coyotito, because of the poverty Kino and Juana face. The novella features a pessimistic determinism plot as Kino's discovery of the pearl of the world causes larger forces to work against them. So the doctor is the one who sets this pessimistic determinism into motion. The first time we meet the doctor in the novella, he proclaims, has Kino any money? No, they never have any money. I, alone in the world, am supposed to work for nothing, and I'm tired of it. So the doctor here definitely refuses to remember the Hippocratic Oath, and he is responsible for setting the forces in motion. Kino wouldn't have found the pearl if it wouldn't be for his need to pay to get Coyotito treatment for his scorpion, for the damage done by the scorpion. And following the doctor's refusal to treat, Juana treats Coyotito, and the narrator proclaims her treatment using seaweed to solve a scorpion bite It's, quote, probably better than the doctor could have done, but the remedy lacked his authority because it was simple and didn't cost anything. So my analysis, the novella gives no indication that the doctor is a quack. It does, however, suggest that the doctor has more cultural capital just because he's a doctor, whether his wisdom is warranted or not. Because of the doctor's education, this sets him apart from Kino and Juana, who are poor and illiterate, leaving them unable to challenge his authority. And the passage definitely showcases the dangers of teleological thinking. And upon returning, some more textual evidence, upon returning to the family, Kino grows suspicious of the doctor's cure, a white powdery substance, ammonia, and a capsule of gelatin. While the narrator does not comment on the effectiveness of this treatment, he does mention Kino's suspicion. He could not take his eyes from the doctor's open bag and from the bottle of white powder there. The narrator also shows how the doctor seems to con Kino. The doctor tells him, sometimes, my friend, the scorpion sting has a curious effect. There will be apparent improvement, but then without warning, poof. The narrator then notes, he pursed his lips and made a little explosion to show how quick it could be, and he shifted his small black doctor's bag about so that the light of a lamp fell upon it, for he knew that Kino's race loved the tools of any craft and trust them. And later, when we see the doctor for the last time, all he's worried about is his payment, having heard the rumors of Kino's pearl. And following Steinbeck's experiences with medical professionals and migrant workers, we can see how his idea of the doctor's teleological thinking disenfranchises this family, who could probably cure the scorpion sting by themselves with their natural remedies. And the Forgotten Village, as many of you guys know, is an interesting piece of literature to analyze. It's mostly fairly short descriptions of images within the screenplay. And we can kind of see, again, some remnants of the naturalism from writers like Dreiser in London. Steinbeck himself was fascinated with the documentary, from The Plow That Broke the Plains from Per Lawrence. And Steinbeck claimed in The Forgotten Village that he had an impartial tone. He noted that he adopted the voice of an old storyteller to carry the images in the screenplay. But the political nature of this story made it anything but impartial. And a brief, for those that don't know The Forgotten Village, it follows Juan Diego's quest to save his sister, first from the old teleological thinking of the wise woman of the village, Trini, to later an uncaring medical profession whose literal distance from these people was a representation of an uncaring profession. So one of the main themes of this work is mysticism versus enlightenment. And we have to consider that the people reading this or watching the documentary were already enlightened. So causing us naturally to not sympathize with the wise woman in the story. We see the limits of the villagers' teleological thinking. After the teacher explains the effects of invisible pathogens to the villagers, he says, we must clean up the water and cure the children. The serum from an infected horse can cure the children. The town chief replies, horse's blood? Are we animals? Are we horses or dogs or rats? What is this horse's blood? What is this new nonsense? Like the doctor in the pearl, the narrator notes a financial motivation. Trinity saw them and was afraid for her business. Horse blood men are here. Likewise, before Juan Diego takes off in quest of help, she tries to cure his sister with a snake skin. So Juan Diego then goes to the city to seek help. And the screenplay dramatically shows this with him sort of walking through a vast desert to try to get to the city. And eventually he finally arrives. And upon arrival, he talks to a doctor who says no medical doctor can help, but he does offer to send an intern and a nurse along with equipment for water tests and serums. Upon their arrival back in the village, the narrator calls the intern a doctor, and the villagers drive out of town with curses, seeing how his serum is full of horse blood. And I note that it is significant that the medical profession could not be bothered to send someone with authority to help. And the narrator's dramatic display of the distance between the village and the city is a representation of the profession's removal from the needs of the patient. So, as a way of concluding, in both these texts, it is not medical professionals who help the villagers overcome illness, but rather the strong moral conviction of Steinbeck's protagonists. It's only because of Juan Diego taking initiative that his sister is saved. It has nothing to do with any of the treatment she received. And same for the Pearl. Using a vocabulary of teleological and non-teleological thinking, Steinbeck was able to articulate his concerns over the professionalization of medicine as the profession affects the dignity of people and their need for individualized care in favor of an impersonal laboratory and sheer motivation for profit. And just thinking about these texts and where they are within Steinbeck's larger career, I see this text, both of these texts, as also creatively cathartic for Steinbeck. After the Grapes of Wrath, he still had leftover business from his experiences in the migrant camps. And once he was able to sort of process this, he was able to then move on to new styles and new literary modes. So he was fine. Later work from Steinbeck breaks out of this sort of naturalism mode. Steinbeck, of course, branches out into other literary forms. And that is it.